Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Psalm 11, When the Wicked Seem to Win. This psalm, again, starts off with a superscription, as do most of these early psalms in the book of Psalms, but this is very brief one for the choir director, a psalm of David. And then the psalm begins, In the Lord I take refuge. So we begin with David seeing that he's going to the Lord for refuge. Of course, refuge is in a time of trouble. You don't take refuge when you're on vacation and things are going great. In the Lord I take refuge. How can you say to my soul? Now, we're not told who the you is. We're going to see the wicked in a minute, but I don't think the you is wicked. But whoever the you is, these are those somebody who's speaking to David, and the you asks a despairing question. And notice the question begins in the next line at the end of verse 1 and goes all the way to the end of verse 3. So the you asks the question, flee as a bird to your mountain, speaking to David. Of course, David is already taking refuge in the Lord, but David's getting some advice. Is it good advice? Is it bad advice? Is it just advice? Flee as a bird to your mountain, because, notice, don't just find refuge in the Lord, but take flight. Hurry up and run. Go and notice verse 2, for behold, the wicked bend the bow. And now I don't think the you is the wicked. I think the you is offering friendly advice, but it's going to be advice of such a nature. It's not advice that says go take refuge in the Lord. David's already doing that, but it's giving some what perhaps is perceived as practical advice. Now, practical advice can be practical, but sometimes it can be so practical that it leaves out the Lord. And maybe this is the case here. So well-meaning, but notice, for behold, the wicked bend the bow. They make ready their arrow upon the string to shoot in the darkness at the upright in heart. And David is the upright in heart. But notice verse 3, if the foundations are destroyed, and I think, and the translators put this in the quotes too, so they think that this is part of what the you is saying, and I think they might be right here. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? Now, that's a question that echoes across the centuries, even to our day and time. People look these days at the actions of politicians, the actions of culture, people turning away from God, doing what appear to be foolish things, making bad decisions, and it seems like the foundations of society, the foundations of things that ought to be better, they just seem to be crumbling. And in the face of that, in the face of everything that gave stability seeming to be turned on its head, the question then is asked, what can the righteous do? And of course, David is seen as one of the righteous, and his friend the you is asking the same thing. What's a righteous person to do when society just seems to lose it, when circumstances take off out of our control, when inflation rises, when jobs grow scarce, when all these bad things happen? What can the righteous do? David comes to a very different perspective in verse 4, where we read that the Lord is in his holy temple. Now, remember, we said in a previous episode that the temple hadn't actually been built yet in David's day. But from a earthly perspective, you saw the tabernacle that had been there for a very long time. It had become rather a permanent fixture in the place known as Shiloh. But here we're going to see, when we speak of the temple, it's not just the temple in Shiloh, it's not just the tabernacle, but rather the Lord's throne is in heaven. And of course, his throne was pictured on earth by the Ark of the Covenant that represented the very throne of God. And yet, that only pictured a heavenly reality. The reality was in heaven. That's where God's throne really is. And notice, his eyes behold. He sees things from heaven. He's not farsighted because of the distance. His eyelids test the sons of men. And notice that idea of testing. The Lord tests the righteous and the wicked. Now, there's two kinds of tests. I'm a college professor, so one of the things that I do is I give tests, and sometimes I'll give the weekly quiz, but then also, sometimes at the end of the semester, we'll have what we call a final exam. And the same thing is given here. He tests, his eyelids test the Son of Man. That's like the weekly quiz. The Lord tests the righteous and the wicked. And notice you have the mention of the wicked here. And the one who loves violence, that one who loves violence, that's the wicked, his soul hates. So, in a sense, he's already failing the test. But then in verse 6, upon the wicked he will rain snares, um, and fire and brimstone and burning wind will be the portion of their cup. That's speaking of the wicked. So there's coming, yes, there's the quizzes, but there's coming the final exam. And we see this as we come to verse 7, it culminates in this. For the Lord is righteous, and he is. He loves righteousness. And sometimes we say the Lord is righteous. He loves righteousness, but he even demands righteousness. I think we're seeing this in the entire scope of this, as opposed to the wicked. But then in Christ, he freely gives what he demands. But instead, notice we read here in verse 7, at the end of verse 7, the upright will behold his face. Now, when we think of God, we think, well, no one can see God. But there's a promise here that the upright will behold his face. And that's echoed when we get to the New Testament, Revelation chapter 22, verse 3, where we read in this picture of the New Jerusalem, there will no longer be any curse, and the throne of God and the Lamb will be in it, that is, in the city, and his bondservants will serve him. Notice verse 4, they will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads, as if to say, these are mine. These are the upright. These are the ones who, because I have worked in their lives, both to declare them righteous, but then to begin that work of righteousness which continues and culminates when they see me. I have my name on them because they have come to take on a bit of a family resemblance. Paul says the same thing. The same thing in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 12. For now we see in a mirror dimly. Our perspective is not what it one day will be, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know fully, just as I also have been fully known. That time when the final exam comes and we find out that in a great sense, Jesus has taken the test on our behalf, because he took the test upon the cross so that he could declare us to be what he is. He could declare us to be righteous as we trust in him.